Hello, everybody. Well, today is my last Sunday at KBS, and it's been a great 4.5 years. I've enjoyed it very much, and it's a bit of a sad day, really. But David asked me if I would preach, record a talk for the last Sunday, or my last Sunday, and I prayed and I felt, asked God what to do, and I felt He was asking me to preach about how we can be sure that the Bible is true, that Jesus actually lived, died, was buried, and rose again from the dead. But this talk is too long really to do in one session, especially in the present climate with recording and everything. So my plan is to record it in 3 parts. And this is the third and final part. And it is looking at the resurrection, the empty tomb, and the resurrection appearances. So firstly, we'll look at the empty tomb. Now, Joseph of Arimathea is mentioned in all 4 Gospels. Undoubtedly, he's an historical figure. If not, he could have been checked out at the time and the whole thing disproved. Archaeology has discovered from excavations of 1st century sites that Jesus' tomb was likely to have been in a slanted grove leading to a low entrance into a cave. Then a large stone-shaped disc would have been rolled down the grove and placed in front of the entrance. Now, it was fairly easy to roll the stone down the grove into place, but in order to move it, to lift it up the grove, would have taken several men. No one seriously today believes that the disciples stole the body, although that was a popular theory during the 18th century. But no one believes it now. Matthew tells us that Roman guards were placed on the tomb to guard it. He uses a word that indicates Roman soldiers. Now, one of the complaints about the Bible, or reasons that skeptics have, is that the 4 Gospels give 4 different accounts. But actually, an historian would say this kind of phrase: I see some inconsistencies, but they are all in the secondary details. Let me explain. The core of the story is the same. So Joseph takes the body of Jesus, puts it in the tomb on the Friday. Some women come along on Sunday morning, followers of Jesus, to visit his tomb. The tomb is empty. They see angels who tells them that Jesus is alive. Now, historians say that the core story is reliable. However conflicting the secondary details might be. For example, the names of the women and the number of angels. These differences suggest that we have multiple independent eyewitnesses of the same event of the empty tomb. All the Gospels include Mary Magdalene and other women. And just as an aside, in Jewish time, any part of the day is counted as a whole day. So Jesus was buried on the Friday evening. He was in the tomb all day, Friday night, all day Saturday, and Sunday morning. So 3 days. The other interesting fact is that in 1st century Israel, women were very much second-class citizens. A woman's testimony was regarded as worthless, so they couldn't be witnesses in a court. If the Gospels had been made up, the writers would have said that Peter and John, one of the other disciples, had found the empty tomb. But they were just concerned with telling accurate events, the Gospel writers were. So Jesus' tomb was known to Christians and non-Christians alike. If the tomb was not empty, it would have been impossible to start a movement based on the belief that Jesus rose from the dead. Nobody claimed that the tomb still contained Jesus' body. Jews, Romans didn't claim that. The belief that God raised Jesus from the dead, based on the evidence, is the best explanation for what happened. All that you need to believe is that God exists, to believe that that happens. So Norman Anderson says, the empty tomb forms the rock on which all rationalistic theories of the resurrection dash themselves in vain. So the tomb was empty. Now let's look at the resurrection appearances. There is no descriptive account of how God actually did it. There was nobody sitting in the tomb when Jesus' body came back to life, when it happened. When I'm explaining it to children, I just say, God zapped Jesus' body and it come back to life. Now, the final part of 1 Corinthians 15 Creed, verses 5 to 8, that we've had read to us, lists some of the post-resurrection appearances. Paul introduces it with saying, he received and it was delivered. They are technical rabbi terms for saying he's passing on holy tradition. Paul wrote 1 Corinthians in AD 55 to 57. And he says that he'd already passed the creed on to the church in Corinth. So it must predate his visit there, which was in AD 51. Various scholars trace this creed from AD 32 to 38, when Paul received it either in Damascus, at his conversion, or in Jerusalem when he met with the disciples. New Testament scholar James Dunn says, we can be confident that it was formulated as tradition, that is the creed, within months of Jesus' death. The leading view is that Paul got the creed from Peter and James, who were eyewitnesses. It is the only place in the Bible where it's mentioned that Jesus appeared to 500 people all at the same time. He says that some are still alive, though some have died. In other words, he's saying to people, check it out. Ask those who actually saw Jesus. Possibly this appearance was in the Galilean countryside or on a hillside, perhaps, that Matthew mentioned, where he says Jesus appeared. There are several different appearances to a lot of different people in the Gospels and Acts. Some to individuals, some to groups, some inside, some outside. Some to skeptics like Thomas, or soft-hearted people like John. The appearances occur over a period of 40 days. I'm going to briefly list them. To Mary Magdalene, John 20:10. To the other women, Matthew 28:8. To Cleopas and the other disciple on the road to Emmaus, Luke 24:13 following. To 11 disciples and others, Luke 24:33. To 10 disciples and others, but not Thomas, John 20:10. Then to Thomas and the other disciples, in verse 26. To 7 disciples, John 21:14. To the disciples, Matthew 28:16. And with the disciples on the Mount of Olives before Jesus' ascension, which Luke tells us in chapter 24 and also in Acts chapter 1, 4 to 9. Peter says, we are all witnesses to the resurrection. He tells Cornelius, we ate and drank with him. He rose from the dead. There is no more attested event in ancient history. To put it into perspective, if you were to call each one of the witnesses that are mentioned in the Bible to a court of law to be cross-examined for 15 minutes each, without a break, it would take from Monday breakfast to Friday dinner to hear them all. Sir Edward Clarke, a High Court judge, said, to me, the evidence is conclusive. I have secured a verdict on evidence not nearly so compelling. As a lawyer, I've accepted the gospel evidence unreservedly as a testimony to truthful men to facts that they were able to substantiate. Of course, there's a story of the family holiday in Israel where mother-in-law died. It was very difficult making funeral arrangements for her in a foreign country. The Israeli undertakers explained that the body could be sent back to the UK at a cost of £5,000, or she could be buried in Israel for 200. The son-in-law quickly decides to have his mother shipped home. The undertaker said, "Yes, sir, but are you sure? It's very expensive." "I know," said the son-in-law, "but 2,000 years ago they buried a guy here, and 3 days later he rose from the dead. I just can't take that chance." The theory of the witnesses hallucinating, seeing Jesus in their mind or some sort of spiritual, ghostly type thing, is no good. Doesn't work. Hallucinations are individual, whereas Jesus repeatedly appeared to groups of people. Also, remember the disciples were full of fear, doubt, and despair on the cross. An hallucination needs expectancy and anticipation. Michael Green says, "There is no rational doubt that the disciples saw Jesus after his resurrection. They were able to say with assurance, 'We have seen the Lord.'" And I just wanted to share one more thing about this, and that is in the Guinness Book of Records, Sir Lionel Luckhoo is the most successful trial lawyer ever. He had 245 successful murder defences in a row. Despite his fame, his wealth, he felt empty inside. The older he got, the more meaningless his life became. At 63, he analysed the claim that Jesus rose from the dead. He found the message of Jesus' resurrection satisfied his personal needs and his intellectual questioning. "I spent more than 42 years as a defence trial lawyer in many parts of the world," he said. He later wrote, "I say unequivocally, the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ is so overwhelming that it compels acceptance by proof which leaves absolutely no room for doubt." Now, they're the resurrection appearances. I just want briefly to look at circumstantial evidences for the resurrection, which are very, very powerful. 1. The disciples died for their beliefs. They'd seen Jesus. They were sure. People won't die for their beliefs if they know their beliefs are false. Secondly, skeptics were converted. James, Jesus' half-brother, who wrote the letter of James, Saul of Tarsus, who became Paul, are 2 examples. Number 3, there was a change in the social structure in Israel. At the time of Jesus, for 700 years, the Jews had been persecuted by various nations, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, now the Romans. Many of them have been relocated, scattered throughout the world, but they survived. But you realize there's no more Perizzites or Ammonites, for example. How did the Jews survive? Because they kept their social structures and passed them down from generation to generation. And they believed to abandon these structures, which were given by God, would be to risk their eternal soul. But these Jewish Christians, the first Christians were all Jews, of course, now called Messianic Jews, changed the social structure. 5 weeks after the resurrection, 10,000 Jews were following Jesus. They started meeting on a Sunday, not a Saturday. They taught you're right with God, not by obeying the Mosaic law. 3, they sacrificed animals no more. 4, they began to worship Jesus as God. And 5, Christians believed the Messiah suffered and died for the sins of the world, whereas Jews believed that the Messiah was a political leader who would overthrow Rome. All those things changed in the social structure. 4th point is that the emergence of communion and baptism. In communion, they met to celebrate Jesus' death, and baptism is a picture, among other things, of Jesus' death and resurrection. Fifthly, the emergence of the church. I've mentioned within 5 weeks, there were 10,000 converts. It spread so rapidly that within 20 years, it had an impact on Rome itself. If you had been a gambler at that time and you had to place a bet on would Christianity or the Roman Empire survive, you would be unlikely to bet on Christianity surviving, because there were a ragtag group of individuals whose primary message was a carpenter from an obscure village had died and rose again, that he defeated death. But that message has become so successful that we call our children Peter, Paul, James, John, but we call our dogs Nero and Caesar. Finally, number 6, the ongoing encounter with a resurrected Jesus happens all over the world, in every culture, to people from all backgrounds and personalities. They all say, Jesus has changed me. And that's what I want to say. My final Sunday at St. John's. Jesus has changed me. If there's a resurrection, there's a heaven. If Jesus was raised, our loved ones will be raised. And one day, I will be raised too. God bless everybody. If you want to know more about the reliability of the Gospels and how can we be sure that Jesus actually died, then you can tune in and watch parts 1 and 2 when I record them. And it's posted on my website in due course. God bless everybody.